So welcome, folks, to weekly Parsha, where we hope what we learn is relevant to our lives, even though it might be a story that's told many, many years ago, and a commandment that was given to us 3,300 years ago. The Torah comes from the word hoira, which means a guide, a lesson. So it needs to be a guide and a lesson in our lives today. So, to be able to have what in Hasidic terminology is mayach shalit alalev, that the mind has the capacity to have a control over the heart. Now, that's a mouthful, let alone a mindful and a heartful, great, shall we say, expectation. But is that indeed something that we're capable of? Are we not products of the genes that we've been given and the environment that has influenced us? To what extent are we, so to speak, programmed in the manner that, and if we are honest with ourselves and think about certain things in our lives that we just somehow are not able to rise above what our natural instinct, our natural tendency would be. It can be sometimes in relationships that a button is pushed. That button is pushed and that creates a response in us that afterwards we say to myself, oh my gosh, oh my God, again, I reacted that way. I know better. And but yet I still reacted that way. So the obvious question is, why? So, if you want to go to a psychoanalysis and a Freudian psychologist and put you down and on a couch and try to figure out, what happened to you in your childhood and, what your mother did to you and what this one did to you and, so on and so forth, and try to dig deep. Or in today, you might go for cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and trying to use your mind to maybe overcome some of the things that are in our behavior, need some therapy. So CBT, is that something relatively new? It's actually a Jewish psychologist who came up with it, Aaron Beck, a graduate from Yale University, and felt that Freudian psychology was not necessarily the only path and the only way to help people with their maladies, and to perhaps allow them with cognitive awareness using the mind to be able to change some behavior. So the truth is, although that became popular through his research and his teachings, but as we will see today, that this is nothing new. It's in Jewish teachings long ago, and ultimately it will be referenced. Well, I don't know. Ultimately, it's referenced, but it will be referenced at least in this week's parsha. To many a parsha, many of teachings, but today we're going to look in our parsha and try to get some reference. So we will come back to this. We will now go into the parsha. I'm going to share the screen so you can have. So here we have from this week's parsha. This is near the end of the parsha. that speaks, just a reminder, we're in the book of Dvorim, the book of Deuteronomy. It's Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses' last 40 days on earth. It's actually, it gets a little sad at the end with his passing. And he is empowering the new generation that's going to go into the land of Israel under the leadership of Yoshua, of Joshua, and many things that they need to be empowered, being on the threshold of entering in the Holy Land, which will become ultimately the Holy Land. So in this week's Parsha, we have certain civil laws that are necessary for them to be aware of, that they will need to fulfill in the land, about making a future monarchy, appointing a king, and instructions about waging war. So to that end, we have here in text number 1, when you go out to war against your enemies and you see horses and chariots, a people more numerous than you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So, speaking about over here, fending off enemies, protecting the borders of Israel, and unfortunately, a necessary thing is called war. My wife and I, several years ago, we went to the capital of Canada, Ottawa, and we went to the Museum of Civilization. I forget, Museum of Civilization. And it was depicting Canada from 300 years ago till today. And it was amazing, you walk through, starting from about 300 years ago, and there was conversations that they had tapes of, the kind of conversations people had in those days, and of course, to make it into a real experience. And what was fascinating is 300 years ago, when a child went to sleep, they didn't know if they would wake up alive, or if they would wake up still being protected in their community, or being conquered by another native tribe that was not far from them. And it's not till recently, basically all of non-Jewish history is about conquering or being conquered. If you look at non-Jewish history, so much of it is just about wars, about conquering and being conquered. And not much else. Everything else is an outgrowth of that, is just a secondary thing that is about nation upon nation conquering, expanding their territory, and so on and so forth. So that's civilization. So the Torah tells us, well, we have a mitzvah that we need to protect our land. We need to protect the lives of the people in the land. And therefore, if it's necessary, you have to wage war. Now, in that mitzvah of protecting the lives, which, hello, Andrew, welcome. There is an appointed Kohen who is there to inspire the people, motivate them, to prepare them for battle psychologically and whatnot. Let's now go back to the reading here in the Parsha. And it will be when you approach the battle that the priest shall come there and speak to the people. And he shall say to them, "Hear, O Israel, today you are approaching the battle against your enemies. Let your hearts not be faint, and you shall not be afraid, and you shall not be alarmed, and you shall not be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you." Important point over here, to save you, right? That is the point over here. So the obvious question is, it says here, don't be frightened. What do you mean, don't be frightened? And what if you are frightened? Is that not a natural thing that someone is going to go into battle? That some will be terrified, others will be just merely frightened. After all, it's bloody, it's brutal. You could lose your life. So how can the Torah be telling us over here not to be scared? It seems to be unrealistic. Now, it's important to note that Maimonides explains that what the Kohen is doing in inspiring the people is not merely an inspiration. In other words, you might say, okay, the Kohen is just, trying to get you into the right frame of mind, and therefore telling you need to not be afraid. God is with you, and he's just an inspirational, speaker who is, rallying up the troops. And that's one way you could look at it. But Maimonides, the Rambam says no. He says, actually, the very words that the Kohen is sharing is a mitzvah. And the very message that the people are hearing and that they're being empowered is also a mitzvah. So in other words, what comes out is that it's an obligation not to fear. It's not just nice words that will be there to hopefully inspire and, give you a little added strength and a greater empowerment, and perhaps, you're not going to be frightened. No, it's a command. How do we understand this command? We know a principle in the Torah that God gives us freedom of choice, freedom of will, that we could choose. So when it comes to action, we understand. When it comes to acting, that we have complete freedom. But when it comes to this command, which is literally, don't be frightened. How can that be commanded of us if indeed our heart we don't have complete control over? Question clear? Any questions on this? Comments? All right. Okay, so this then comes from the angle of fear of war, fear of the result that can come from war, a battle. And here there's a commandment. We need to understand what that means. What is indeed the command then? How do you turn the heart? How can you turn it around? Now let's understand from another angle, not from the angle of fear, but the angle when it comes to love. We have a positive commandment in the Torah that is a mighty, tall order, and that's called Avas Yisrael, that we have to love, V'ahavta kamecha, that we have in the book of Leviticus, that we have to love a fellow Jew as ourselves. Now, just to love another individual is indeed a challenge, but to love another as yourself is even a greater challenge. And again, this is a question of the heart. How is it possible then that we have such a commandment? So there are some commentators that say that this commandment is not something that ultimately we can truly affect in our heart because we don't have control over it. So we can't love someone as ourselves. So then what does it mean? It just means you got to be very generous in spirit. You have to avoid feelings of resentment and envy towards another individual. as the verse actually says before it comes to the mitzvah of loving another as yourself, but to love someone as yourself. Nachmanides, the Ramban, says that that's not something that is an obligation. Other commentators suggest that this is again unrealistic, and therefore you should just treat another how you would like to be treated yourself, and that's how they understand this. But we need to understand the Torah is commanding. Is there a way that we can come to this kind of love where, even though by the human condition, it's seemingly something that we're not capable of, but is there a way that we can achieve this, that we can rise beyond, and as it says literally, to love someone as ourselves? There's an answer given to this in Tanya, but we're not going to go in that direction. We're going to go in a different direction. Now with that, we're going to go into understanding what in Hasidic teachings gives us two ways that we can look at our negative feelings that we have, whether anxiety that we have because you're going to war, or the lack of love that you should have to someone that should be loved, and how to deal with this. Two distinct methods. One will call it top down, and one will be bottom up. Top down is for the person who's able to stand straight and to stand upright, which is not always such a simple thing. It may sound simple, but not so simple. Let us look at the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek. He shares with us the following. This is a letter that he writes to one of his chassidim who was having a great challenge with negativity, with negative thoughts and whatnot. So every person has three soul garments, which are faculties of thought, speech, and action. Why do we call them garments? Anybody know? Why is thought, speech, and action a garment? Because a garment, like what I'm wearing and what you're wearing, is something you can put on and put off. You can put it on, take it off. In other words, a soul garment is, it dresses the soul, but it's not the soul itself. What's the soul itself? What is the makeup of the soul itself? Is our intelligence and our emotions. That's what defines the soul. Oh, well, it doesn't define the essence of the soul, but the makeup of the soul. Garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. So he continues and says, they are primary factors in a person's conduct. And in each of them, we have free will and the power to think, to speak, and to act as the mind wills. Even if there is fear in one's heart, it is possible to remove it through thought, speech, and action. So what's fear? Fear is an emotion. So what is he saying over here? The fear could be mitigated or even completely gone. How? Not dealing with the emotion itself, but what does he say? Through thought, speech, and action, garments of the soul, the expression of the soul. The key is not to think or speak about it at all, but to do the opposite, as it is written in Likutei Amarim and Tanya in chapter 14. Thus we have been commanded, do not be afraid, which means do not think about the fear. So look how he defines this, right? Till now we understood do not be afraid is an emotion. An emotion is what defines the soul, or is the quality of the soul, right? Together with intelligence. But here he's saying, do not be afraid means don't think about the fear. The Rambam in the Laws of Kings and Wars, chapter 7, has ruled accordingly that anyone who frightens himself and thinks thoughts of fear transgresses a negative commandment. So remember, we asked the question, there's a commandment. You're not allowed to be fearful. What is the commandment he's explaining over here? If you're thinking thoughts of fear, then you are transgressing. Is it the feeling itself? No. But it's the thought. As soon as one is completely desists from said thoughts, the fear in their heart will automatically dissipate. Or at the very least, that fear will immediately become as if dormant and imperceptible to the body. And then after a few days, it will dissipate completely so that it won't enter one's mind at all, even as an intrusive thought. This is the meaning of the commandment, do not let your hearts be afraid. This is a powerful idea. Let us recap this to make sure that we have clarity over here. And if anybody has questions, please don't be bashful because this is very important. So when it comes to the soul itself, the intelligence of the soul, the emotions of the soul, we don't have the capacity to have control over that. We don't have that capacity unless you're righteous. Only the righteous have capacity of the control of their emotions. I'll give you a tzaddik can go like this, and whatever feeling they had can be reversed literally on a dime, so to speak, right? They have such mastery, and it's not mastery that they even had to think and produce a very profound thought that affects the heart. No, they have such mastery over the heart that they can produce the feeling literally in such a manner. Tzemach Tzedek, famous story that the Rebbe tells about him, actually was on Purim, but the Rebbe took a lot of l'chaim. And the Rebbe told a story about him that the Tzemach Tzedek also once had taken a lot of l'chaim, and he put his hand over his forehead and had a moment of the sense of God's awesome presence, and all of the l'chaim's effect dissipated instantaneously. That's a tzaddik, that's a righteous person. And that's what happened with the Rebbe then. This goes back to 1958. I wasn't there, so I've heard and read. A righteous person literally has that kind of capacity. Oh, we see a picture of the Rebbe. Thank you, Denise, for the picture. Has that capacity. We don't have that control over our heart, that at will, whatever is necessary to feel at that moment would be felt. A righteous person does. How? Because they are devoid of any negative, any lust or desire or anything in their heart that's not unto God. That therefore they have that capacity. We don't. But what we do have the capacity is in the garments that we wear. We could choose what we want to wear in our thoughts, in our speech, and in our actions. And as a result, of if we think something profoundly enough, then through the quality of our mind called das, which is knowledge, which is the gateway, which is what funnels from our thought process. Again, not our intelligence, but our what we're thinking from our thought process. It funnels it to the heart to such a way that the heart becomes dissipated, not transformed, that we're not capable of, but not to allow the heart to have any expression in the mind, in the thoughts, that rather, in the thoughts. Is that clear? So let's see this in the Alter Rebbe. Okay, I mean in that Tzemach Tzedek rather. When one withdraws thought from something, the fear subsides. The reason for this is because the intellectual and emotional attributes are sustained by das, focus, attention, which is called by the Zohar in the reference to the role of directing the 6 primary emotions, emotional attributes, the key that contains 6, and it is only through the medium of thought that das is able to invest itself in the midas, the emotional attributes. Therefore, by withdrawing one's thought, das is removed from the emotional attribute in question, and then the emotional attribute is deactivated as if it never was. So getting back to our original case of war, right? You go back to our original case of war. So if Torah understands that people are going to be fearful, of course, it's only natural that that's what's going to happen. What the Torah is obligating us is, what are you thinking? Not what you're feeling. Because what you think can be funneled through your das, your knowledge, the intelligence that you have in that thought, can be funneled to the heart in such a way by focusing long enough that you will make the feeling dormant. Won't be non-existent probably, but at least that it will not be able to have any capacity of control over you in any real way. This is the idea of mayach shalat al lev, that the mind has dominion over the heart. So I just read this Shabbos, a beautiful story of what we call the Chassid's Chassid, was Mendel Futerfas. Mendel Futerfas, I think he passed away something like 20 years ago, or something 20 odd years ago he passed away. And Rav Mendel was responsible, one of the key components that was responsible in 1946, 1947 for the exodus of hundreds of Chassidim from Russia. They went through Lemberg and they got out with fake passports, because anybody after the war that was a Polish citizen, many Polish citizens went into Russia during the war to run away from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. And he was one of the chief organizers of getting everybody out. He got his family out, but he stayed behind. Finally, the Soviet authorities got hold of him and arrested him. Many very interesting details, which he really didn't divulge too much afterwards when he came to America. And I think it was 1964, if I recall. It was about a dozen years, ended up in Siberian camp. In any case, he was imprisoned. And coming out of prison, the day he comes out, He came out the same time as another Lubavitcher Chassid, and they were quite clearly forewarned that they cannot have any conversation between them. They're going to be shot on the spot. They were sentenced to Siberia, but, they could be killed on the spot just as easily. They saw each other. They actually embraced. And the Soviet authorities were actually taken aback in the sense that they saw, such love and devotion to each other. Out of Mendel, the first words he says to Rav Moshe Mishetsky, a fellow Chassid, he says, "No, have you been serving God with joy?" So I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I knew this man. This wasn't someone from the storybooks, You coming out of Soviet prison, where at that moment your life could be over. The Soviets are watching. They're watching you there as you're coming out. And this is what you have in mind. This is what your thought is. This is where your headspace is. Have you been serving God with joy in prison? Even if you're not going to get shot down, he knows where he's going. He's going to Siberia. No. Why? He's not a tzaddik. He's not a righteous person. He was a chassid. So he didn't have the mastery over his heart like a righteous person does. But what he was able to do in prison and in all times is to choose what he wanted to think. And because he chose that, even though he was in prison, he was joyful to serve God. When he was in Siberia, so he was there with a bunch of, you can imagine what kind of people. But there were also some intellectuals, besides from the common day criminal, there were intellectuals that were there. And each one was lamenting about, their situation, which is normal. One was an artist. Oh, I can't wait to get back to my art. Another one was a scientist. Another, So they look at Mendel and they see that the guy's happy. He was always a jolly person. There was maybe another chassid there besides him, and it was mainly non-Jews. And they said, tell us about your life. What are you always jolly about? What's your, you must have been a real loser that being here is not, better than where you were from. He says, no, actually, I was a successful businessman and I have a family. I dearly miss them. But the difference between me and you is very simple. By you, life is defined by the things that you engage in and do. So if you're an artist, it's in your art. If you're a scientist, it's in your science. For me, what life is defined by is the fact that I am a servant of God. So whether I'm serving God with my family or serving God in a labor camp or in prison, I'm there to serve, and I'm going to do it with joy. Where does that come from? Now, obviously, it comes, it's a belief that you have. That's no question. But beyond the belief, it's much more than the belief. It's because the mind has dominion over the heart that you are constantly, this is what you focus in on. Because if you're in Siberia for 12 years, there is no question where your mind can go and where it naturally will go. There's no question naturally where it's going to go, into a very dark place. And we wouldn't blame a single person if that happened to them. It's not a question of blame. It's natural. However, we have the capacity, as Mendel taught us, to learn this from a tzaddik doesn't want to help us. You know why? Because we're not tzaddikim, we're not righteous. But to learn this from someone like Reb Mendel, who's a chassid's chassid, yes. But he's like us. He just worked on himself. He had the time to work on himself, to develop himself. And this is what he was able to do. So what does that mean for us? We worry, we think, we have problems, we have, become fearful, debilitating things that we need to know that we have a muscle in our body called the brain. And that muscle can create new, what's it called? Because the plasticity of the brain, you can create new crevices. How? By our thoughts. Because of the plasticity of the brain, even though we are programmed and wired to be in one way to think, if we choose to think differently, we can literally reprogram our brain because of the positive thoughts. So when we look at it that way as a muscle, then it's very different. Let's see, sorry. So over here, again from the Tzemach Tzedek, this is from the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. In the main, the diversion of das in one's thought is achieved by guarding one's thoughts and by investing them elsewhere, if it's a negative thing, right, to invest it elsewhere. This can even be in worldly matters, if they are pressing or positive, or in God's Torah, which gladdens the heart each and every day by setting fixed times for Torah study, especially when together with another study partner. So has anybody ever tried this? You ever try to really reprogram the way you think about something or about someone? I would suggest that is often where the issue is, that we have a set pattern on how we think about someone, a loved one usually, and to change that thought pattern, as the Tzemach Tzedek here said, that we, to put it into some positive manner and allow us then to invest ourselves in that, and using then das, our mind, when we think. And the more we can concentrate and to allow it to develop, it then becomes a reality within us. This is, in the world, there's a concept of meditation. In the world, meditation means to clear your mind. In Jewish teachings, it's the opposite. Fill your mind with the appropriate things that are necessary to create, with the plasticity of our brain, a new pathway of thinking, a new manner on how to see things. So it's not an easy task. It's not easy, right? Because I can only speak for myself. I'm not speaking to anybody here, but out of laziness, and I have a lazy bone, out of laziness, I won't use my mind the way I should use my mind, and allow the natural inclination, the way my mind thinks of things, to ponder. I catch it and stop it. And when I'm really vigilant, I catch it very early and don't allow it to continue to think that way. But it's like exercise. I think I've mentioned to some of you before in the class, recently I have started to doing exercise since one of the blessings of COVID. I'm doing exercise, physical exercise. I can't say I enjoy this much more than exercise. Exercise of the mind, I enjoy immensely more than the physical body. But I know I got to do it. Since I'm getting younger, I got to do it. Necessary. It's a battle. But I can sense that when I do it, how it's invigorating and how it's developing physical muscles. The physical muscles is nothing compared to the mental muscle that we have in our brain that we can train it. How? Through thought. Why thought? It's a garment. I could choose the thought that I want to think. Yeah, it's like exercise. We get lazy. I get lazy. I get lazy. I'm sure none of you are like me, but I get lazy. And but as important as physical exercise is, manyfold more is it important mental exercise. Why? Now, God forbid if you're not physically well and you need to. But we're not a physical being. We're people of the spirit, of the soul, of mind and heart. Actually, we need to have a healthy body. You know why? Why do we need a healthy body? Because it houses your Holy Spirit, your neshama. So if you're going to have a hole in the body, you're going to have a bigger hole in the soul. Right? But if we're concerned with our body's well-being, and all the more so with our soul's well-being, where does that? It's in our minds, our thoughts rather, not in our mind, but in our thoughts. That's in our mind. Any questions on this part? Clear? Andrew, go ahead.
Actually, I'm an attorney, and there was an attorney that got hit as a pedestrian, and he had suffered brain damage, and he subsequently finished college, and then they allowed him to take the entrance exams with extra time. And at the end of it all, he was struggling, and somehow he actually developed different pathways to the brain. So it actually physically did change. So I don't see
that's the studies that they've made that, in recent years, the plasticity of the brain, you can create new pathways. That's through thought, what we choose to think. So we can create a different path, which then gives us new opportunities, opens up new doors in our lives as a result of it. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah, very true. Very true. Okay, what we have engaged in now is the up-down. Why is it up? Because it starts with the mind, the thoughts, and it filters into the heart that will dissipate the negative feelings, the inappropriate feelings that we have in the heart, right? But we can't always get there. It's not always, not always so easy. Definitely not easy. We can't necessarily manage that at all times. So what do? So there's another venue that Tzemach Tzedek speaks about, and that is a down-up mode of being. And let us share that over here in the next teachings. Yep. So Tzemach Tzedek says, what's more, a person ought to be very careful not to speak of any melancholy matters. To the contrary, one ought to exhibit joyous mannerisms as though his heart was filled with happiness, even if at that time his heart is not. It eventually will be. The reason for this is that the deeds and the activities a person performs subsequently becomes fixed in his heart, as the Rambam writes, he should perform once, a second time, a third, the actions he does because they are reasonable, and then these attributes will be affixed in his heart. So what are we talking about over here? Not talking now about the mind, right, or what you're thinking. Now we're talking about action. What kind of actions are you taking? You're talking about body language over here. What are your gestures, right? So very simple. What happens when we're kind of down and out? Your physical body literally expresses it. Your shoulders kind of cave in a bit, you slump, you drag your feet, your eyes are downcast. That's what happens. So the Tzemach Tzedek is telling us over here, no. You gotta act in a joyful manner. You need to have the disposition of joy, of happiness, even though in your heart right now you are going through something that is perhaps even devastating, debilitating. What do you got to do? I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. I can only talk for myself. There are times that as a running a couple of organizations, a drug crisis center for people with addiction, running a Chabad house, and so on. That the responsibilities are great, and the challenges are they can weigh you down. And you can feel like, sometimes you're sinking, whether it's financially, whether it's other things that are just, seeming to fall apart. And it's easy to succumb. And we've all experienced that in some way, some manner in our lives. So sometimes I'm feeling it. And at that moment, it's not so easy for me to focus my thoughts on a positive thing, because what happens what happens with our thoughts? The perfect example is when we daven. Now, maybe right now you're focused, but try davening. How easy it is to lose your focus on davening, right? So for 30 seconds, you're focused on the words, and then all of a sudden your mind went astray. It's hard. It's not easy to remain focused with thoughts in your mind, right? It's a challenge. So you can try, but it doesn't work always the upright way. So sometimes what I do is that I will just start singing a nigun, Hasidic melody, and start to dance. I'm not feeling the dance. I'm not feeling the joy. Too bad. I don't care. I'm not gonna. I just say, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What's happening? I'll just start singing a nigun and a freilach one, and I'll get up and I'll even dance. You know what happens? Oh my gosh, it just puts you into a different headspace. It just brings you out of a place. Am I feeling it? No. But what's happening at that moment? I'm not allowing the feelings to be expressed in my thoughts. The anxiety has been dissipated. I'm able now to regain some kind of control. It's down up. Why is it down up? Because it's starting with your feet. It's not starting with your head. Lowest in the sense, lowest in the quality of power of soul. Right? Thought is much more. Speech is much more, shall we say, human. Action. Animals also take action, right? Animals can also prance and dance around. And maybe even, I don't know, parrot can sing. Okay, so we use that power of action just to break out of that negativity. And this is what the Alter Rebbe, I mean the Tzemach Tzedek is telling us. So, what do we have over here? Let us now go back to our soldier who's fighting in a war. So it's interesting. What happens when you go out to battle? First of all, the soldiers have to physically express themselves in a certain way, right? Their shoulders out, and they're marching. Napoleon used to have a marching song of victory going into battle, because just singing the marching song of victory was already putting them in a different headspace as a result. It gave them the confidence, it gave them everything that was necessary. So that is when it comes to war. When it comes to Ahavas Yisrael, what does that mean? When it comes to loving another Jew as yourself. So what that might mean. So when it comes to the mind, the first manner, right, that we spoke about thinking. So sometimes, as I mentioned before, is that what we just need to do is think about that person who we should be loving, and think about the good qualities that they have. Do they have negative qualities? Yes. I choose not to think about those. I choose not to think about them. Do they pop up into my head? Yeah. Push them away. And I choose to think about those great qualities that person has, in order that should feed a love. That's the up down. What's the down up? My mind isn't there. I'm not doing it. You know what? I act lovingly towards them anyways. I'm acting in a loving way, even if I don't feel it. There's two types of love. There's a love that is reflective of the right hand. Chesed is the right hand, right? When we speak with our hands, why do we speak with our hands? Because when you're passionate about something, your hands get engaged. So the right is the passion of love in the body. It's a stronger hand. Of course, if you're a lefty, then your right hand is your left hand, right? So it's a passion of love. Do we always have a passionate love for the people that we should love? No. Does that mean we can't express love to them? We can. You know what that is called? It's called the right foot, which is netzach. Netzach translates as victory, triumph, triumphant, endurance. It's called an enduring love. An enduring love means that when you don't feel the love, because if the mind didn't feed the heart, so you're not feeling the love, right? Your thoughts didn't give you the proper feelings in the heart. Okay, you can still have an enduring love, which is the right foot, which is the stabilizing kind of love. It's the love that comes without passion. We're capable of that. How? Just by expressing love in it, whatever, whether it's a gift that you bring and give it in a loving way, treating others in such a way that that they sense your devotion and goodness towards them. On this, we all have the capability that we can act lovingly. Netzach, the right foot, which is what stabilizes the body, and that enduring love that isn't full of passion, that was developed because of an understanding the mind has. It feeds the heart, and we can still express it. That's the Ahavas Yisrael we can have. So let's sum up things here for a moment. So we make sure we have a take home, because there's a lot over here. So what do we need to know over here? Do we have any control over the way we are naturally inclined? Absolutely. Is it a challenge? Absolutely. It's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. It is definitely challenging. Just like exercise is challenging, likewise, to use the muscle of the brain with our thoughts is a challenge. But the first thing we need to know is that we have the capability. Then, of course, knowing that, we have to want. And wanting, and we need to know that we have the capability of using our thoughts in a way that it can be funneled through our das, through our knowledge, and can actually feed the heart. Is it going to change things drastically? Maybe not, but that's okay. Because what's most important is not what you have emotionally in you, but what you entertain in your thoughts. That even though in your heart maybe you feel something that's negative, but if you won't allow it to be expressed in your thoughts, right? And you constantly engage in a contrary thought to that negative feeling you have in your heart, eventually, because you're creating through the plasticity of the brain, a new funnel, new crevice in the brain, literally, it's going to then allow that the heart can slowly, very slowly change. But even if the heart really, it will definitely change in the fact that it's not allowed to have its self-expression. It will definitely, become something that's on the back burner and dissipate with time because I don't allow it to be expressed. Try this in the next week with one loved person who you can have some negative thoughts towards and negativity towards them. Don't allow that to be expressed in your thoughts. And if it does, and it will come up, it definitely will come up. Push it away and change it into something positive about that person if possible. That would be the best thing. But definitely not to allow that to be entertained. And again, remember, it's hard because our mind goes adrift, so it'll come back. But the more we exercise that muscle, the more that we will see how it will fade away. And then next week you could, if you want to share, you could share. All right. Tim, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I was curious, the up down and then the down up. The up down obviously is
the thoughts.
What is directing everything? I mean, the up and the down. Is that still our thoughts that are directing the down up?
Your will.
My will.
Your will, which is all encompassing. That
Okay.
This is what you want to do.
Right.
That you want to serve God. This
Right.
is called serving God. That you want that. And when you want that, then you can facilitate in both manners of, the up, down or down, up. Very good question. Right? And then by exercising that, together with that, also literally use some exercise. Get up and dance. You're not feeling it? You're not feeling joy in serving God? Okay, so get up and dance. Sing a Hasidic melody. Just, as I say, just do it. That's the Jewish way. Whatever, is natural, I'm not going to let that get me down. I'm just going to start singing a niggin and pick myself up. Today, I don't know what happened. It was very sunny, hot day, and And I went out, I had to do something in the Chabad house, and it was outdoors, and I came back, I felt a little, I don't know, I wasn't even out that long. I don't know what it is. But I just didn't have koyach, didn't have strength. Whatever. Then finally just, okay, break out of it, sing a niggin. Don't let this have control over me.
And other people can have that effect on you as well, if whether positive or negative. So thank you.
We all have buttons that can be pushed, right? And especially by loved ones. So if we're aware of that, and we know that that button gets pushed and a negative thought comes up, if we're aware of that, then before that button is pushed, I already know what I can put there in its place instead of that natural instinctual place that I go of that negative thought. But that's, again, that's a muscle you got to work on, right? It's not so simple. All right, folks. Any other questions or comments? It's been great. All right. I want to wish everybody a good Tvach, and thank you for joining. May we live with this for the week, and next week if you have something to share. You don't have to give any of the personal details, but just the success.
Oh, lovely picture. Lovely picture.
All right. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to go sing and dance now.
All right. Wonderful. Be well. All the best.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.